I still remember that morning, the one where my sister's voice cut through the house like glass breaking in slow motion. Dad's funeral had been 3 days ago. The house still smelled of lilies and rain-soaked coats. People had stopped coming by with casseroles and kind words. Silence had moved in, heavy and uninvited. I was in the kitchen when I heard her heels click on the tiles. "Emma," she said, arms folded, pearls perfect even in grief. "I just came from the lawyer's office. You should probably know before the papers arrive." She let that hang in the air like smoke. Then she smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Dad cut you out of the will," she said softly. "You're not getting a penny." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. The words didn't make sense. Not after everything. After the years I spent caring for Dad, after selling my own house to move closer when his health started failing. I set down my teacup, hands trembling slightly. "That's impossible," I managed. "He wouldn't do that." "Believe what you like," she said, checking her phone, "but the lawyer showed me the draft himself. You're not mentioned, not once." And then she left, the smell of her expensive perfume trailing behind, like the last note of a cruel song. I stood there in that kitchen, the rain starting to fall again outside. It was cold, sharp, and unrelenting, the kind of rain that soaks through your skin and finds its way. I was the quiet one. That's what everyone used to say. Dad would laugh and tell people, "My Emma listens before she speaks. That's why when she finally says something, you'd better pay attention." He used to say that with pride, the kind that warmed my chest when I was little. My sister, Claire, was the opposite. Louder, brighter, always first to raise her hand, first to be noticed. We were only 3 years apart, but it felt like we lived in different worlds. Growing up, our family home sat on a hill just outside the village, the kind of place that looked like it had been pulled out of a painting. Brick walls, ivy climbing up to the windows, a small apple tree in the back garden that Dad planted the year Mom died. Mom's passing was the first fracture we never truly repaired. I was 13, Claire was 16. She cried the loudest at the funeral, threw herself into Dad's arms, and said she'd take care of us. I remember watching her, so composed in her grief, so strong, and believing her. But strength can turn sharp over time, and love, when unbalanced, becomes something else entirely. Dad worked as a local solicitor, nothing fancy, but everyone in town trusted him. He believed in fairness, in doing things by the book. He'd often sit me at his desk when I was a teenager, showing me the letters he wrote for clients. "Every word matters, Emma," he'd say. "A misplaced word can change a person's whole life." It's strange, isn't it, how the very man who taught me that would one day have his own words turned against me. Claire never cared much for the family business. She was all about the city, fashion, finance, noise. At 18, she moved to London with a suitcase full of dreams and Dad's old credit card. I stayed, finished school, helped with the house, the garden, the bills. Dad used to joke that between the two of us, years passed, and our paths only drifted further apart. Claire would visit for birthdays or holidays, wearing expensive coats and talking about clients and meetings I could barely imagine. She'd kiss Dad on the cheek, hand him some luxury gift, and leave the wrapping paper for me to clean up. I didn't mind then. I told myself that's just how families worked. Everyone played their part. But I started noticing something. The way she'd talk over me when I tried to speak. How she'd smile at Dad but roll her eyes when he wasn't looking. And how, slowly, she began to speak of our father's kindness as if it were weakness. "Dad needs to modernize," she'd say. "Sell the house, invest the money, maybe hire someone to care for him properly. You can't keep wasting your life here, Em." Wasting. That word stuck. I'd look at the garden, at the same apple tree that had shaded our childhood picnics, and wonder if she really saw all this as a waste. When Dad's health began to falter, I didn't think twice. I left my part-time job at the library and moved back home fully. I cooked, cleaned, made sure he took his medication. Claire sent flowers, sometimes money, rarely her presence. One Christmas, when Dad's cough had worsened, she called. Her voice was sweet, careful. "Em, I'll try to come up this weekend, okay? But I'm just swamped. You know how it is." I know. It was always the same story, the job, the meetings, the flights. Still, Dad defended her. "She's doing her best," he'd say softly, sipping his tea. "She loves you both equally." But love has many shapes, some gentle, some sharp, and some, like my sisters, are transactional. When the end came, it came quietly. Dad passed away in his sleep on a rainy Thursday morning. The world didn't stop. Birds still sang outside, the clock still ticked, but something inside me broke. Claire arrived that evening in black heels and red lipstick, smelling of rain and perfume. She hugged me, whispered, "You did so much, Em," and then started asking about paperwork. The tone was wrong, too professional, too soon. I tried not to notice, tried not to care. But when she said, "Don't worry, I'll handle the lawyer," something in me stirred. A small warning, faint but real. Because Dad had promised he'd left everything equally. He'd told me himself months before. And I believed him. That belief was the only thing that kept me calm the morning she showed up and said those words, "You're not getting a penny." I didn't know it then, but those words would open every locked door. It's strange, looking back now, how easy it is to mistake routine for peace. For years, that's what I did, called it stability, when really it was silence wearing a polite face. After Mom died, Dad and I built our world around small comforts. Morning tea in the garden, Sunday papers, the hum of the radio while he worked on his crossword. He loved the ordinary. He said it made him feel grounded, a word I never fully understood until everything wasn't. Claire, on the other hand, hated ordinary. She used to say, "Dad's stuck in the past, Em. He needs to live a little, invest, travel, sell the house. What's he clinging to?" But that house was his past and his future. Every room was a memory, every photo a quiet monument to what we'd survived. The last summer before he died, things between them grew tense. She came down from London for a long weekend, saying she wanted to help sort out Dad's affairs. That was her phrase, affairs, like he was already gone. I remember the first morning she arrived, her sharp perfume filling the hallway, her phone already glued to her hand. Dad was sitting by the kitchen window, trying to pour his tea without spilling. Claire didn't even take off her sunglasses. "Daddy," she said, voice honeyed but rushed, "I've been thinking, you should really consider putting the house in my name, just in case anything happens." He laughed softly, a sound I knew too well. "Why on earth would I do that, love?" "Well," she said, taking a seat, crossing her legs like she was in a boardroom, "it's practical. I could manage the taxes, keep it safe. Em's here anyway. She doesn't need to worry about paperwork." I looked up from the sink, drying my hands. "Claire, he's perfectly capable of managing his own house." She turned, lips curling into that familiar smile. "Of course, I'm just being cautious." Cautious, another word that really meant calculated. That weekend, she started digging through old files, wills, insurance papers, deeds. She said she was helping, but it felt more like she was mapping something. When I asked what she was looking for, she waved her hand. "Oh, nothing serious, just making sure things are in order." But I saw the way Dad's eyes followed her movements, uneasy, uncertain. And later that night, when she'd gone upstairs, he called me into the living room. Emma, he said quietly, if anything ever happens to me, promise you'll call the lawyer yourself. Don't let Claire handle everything alone. I frowned. Of course. Why would I not? He hesitated, as if choosing his next words carefully. Because she's different from you. She sees the world through what it can give her. You see it through what you can give others. That's both your strength and your weakness. He smiled then, reaching over to squeeze my hand. When Claire left that Sunday evening, she hugged him longer than usual. Then she turned to me. You really should think about your own life, you know? You're always here. Don't you ever want more? I wanted to tell her that more wasn't always money or travel or titles. Sometimes more meant peace, knowing you were needed, loved, steady. But she wouldn't have understood, so I just smiled and said, I have enough. She looked at me the way people look at a child who's missed the point. Then she got in her car, slammed the door, and was gone. The following weeks were quiet again. Dad and I fell back into our rhythm, tea, books, and long walks when the weather allowed. But I noticed how often he'd check his mail now, how carefully he locked his study door at night. Once, I even saw him shred a stack of papers, something I'd never seen him do before. When I asked why, he simply said, some things are better kept private, Em. Not everyone needs to see everything. At the time, I thought he was just tired of Claire's interference, but later I'd realize he wasn't hiding from her. He was protecting something for me. The last time the three of us were together was the week before he passed. He'd asked us to have dinner together, said he wanted one more proper family evening. I cooked his favorite shepherd's pie. Claire brought a bottle of expensive red wine she couldn't pronounce. We sat around the old oak table, laughter thin but present. For a moment, it almost felt like the family we used to be. Then Claire raised her glass and said lightly, to Dad, may we all make wise choices when the time comes. He smiled, but his eyes went distant, and for the rest of the meal, he barely said another word. I didn't know it then, but that dinner was his goodbye, his quiet way of saying, remember who you are when I'm gone. When he died, I expected grief, but not suspicion. Yet from the first phone call Claire made, to the funeral plans she controlled, to the paperwork she insisted on managing, it was clear she wasn't just mourning, she was maneuvering. And when she stood in my kitchen a week later, telling me I'd been cut out of the will, I realized every soft smile she'd ever given had been practice for this very moment. The morning after Claire dropped her little bombshell, the house felt colder, as if her words had seeped into the walls overnight. I made myself a cup of tea, but it tasted wrong. Everything did. I'd barely slept. I kept hearing her voice replay in my head, "You're not getting a penny." Every syllable carried a kind of finality, like she wasn't just stating a fact, she was claiming victory. But over what? Dad and I had always been close. Even when he and Claire argued, he would call me after, just to talk about the garden or what the neighbor's dog had done that week. He wouldn't have left me with nothing. He wouldn't. That certainty, fragile as it was the only thing keeping me upright. By mid-morning, I called the law firm where Dad had worked most of his life, Harris and Winfield. I'd known the receptionist since childhood. She used to bring sweets for us when Dad took us to his office. "Hi, this is Emma Lee," I said, my voice steady but small. "I'm calling about my father's will. I was told it's been settled." She paused. Too long. "Oh, yes. One moment, Emma. I'll transfer you to Mr. Harris." My heart started to pound. When his voice came on, it was warm but careful. "Emma, I'm so sorry for your loss. Your father was a good man." "Thank you," I said. I wanted to ask about his will. My sister said there's already been a reading." He hesitated. "There hasn't been one yet. We're still finalizing some details. Claire did visit, yes, but I haven't released anything officially. I felt my breath catch. Wait, so she lied? I wouldn't say that, he said gently. Perhaps she misunderstood. But I knew that tone. It was the same tone Dad used when he didn't want to speak ill of someone. Soft, non-committal, protective. Could you tell me what's in it? I asked. I'm afraid not until the formal reading, he replied. But I'll say this. Your father thought very highly of you, Emma, very highly indeed. He cleared his throat. You'll be hearing from me soon. For a few minutes, I just stood there, the phone still in my hand, the tea gone cold beside me. If there hadn't been any reading, then Claire had made the whole thing up. But why? What could she possibly gain from making me believe I'd been cut out? That evening, I drove to Dad's house, the old brick place now sitting quiet and hollow. I'd avoided it since the funeral, but something in me needed to go back. The keys still worked. The smell of him, old books, pipe tobacco, cedar polish, still lingered in the air. I walked through the room slowly, like tracing the outline of a ghost. When I reached his study, I stopped. The desk, always neat, was empty. No papers, no folders, not even the small wooden box where he kept his personal documents. I opened drawers, checked shelves. Nothing. But then, on the bottom of the bookcase, I found it. A small envelope, half hidden behind a row of law journals. My name written on the front, in his handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a short note, the paper slightly creased from his unsteady hands. M, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Don't let anyone rush you. Don't sign anything until you've spoken to Mr. Harris yourself. Trust your instincts. They've always been kinder than most people's intentions. Love, Dad. I sat there for a long time, tears blurring the ink until the letters ran like watercolor. That was all the proof I needed. Something wasn't right. The next day, Claire called. Her tone was casual, almost rehearsed. Hey, just checking in. I spoke to Mr. Harris, I said, keeping my voice calm. Oh. He said there hasn't been a reading yet. Silence. Then a laugh, light, dismissive. Oh, well, maybe I misunderstood. You know how legal stuff gets confusing. You said Dad cut me out, Claire. Maybe I shouldn't have phrased it that way. I didn't want you to be surprised later, that's all. Her lies were so smooth now, I almost admired them. Almost. I found a letter, I said quietly, from Dad. He said not to sign anything. Her breath hitched, barely, but I caught it. Emma, she said slowly, Dad was confused near the end. Don't take everything he said too seriously. The way she said it, that soft, patronizing tone, ignited something deep inside me. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel small in her shadow. I felt angry, righteously angry. I think I'll wait for the lawyer, I said, and hung up. That night, I sat by the kitchen window, watching the rain slide down the glass. Outside, the world went on, unbothered, unbroken. But inside me, something had shifted. The quiet sister, the patient daughter, the one who always yielded. She was still here, but she wasn't going to be silent anymore. If Claire wanted a war built on lies, then I'd fight with truth, even if it broke me to do it. I woke up the next morning with that strange, weighty kind of calm, the kind that comes after a decision's already been made. There's no going back now. I'd spent half the night rereading Dad's letter, tracing his handwriting with my fingertips, like the loops and lines could somehow bring him back. Don't sign anything until you've spoken to Mr. Harris yourself. It wasn't just advice. It was a warning. By mid-morning, I got the call I'd been waiting for. "Emma," came Mr. Harris's voice. "I was planning to reach out today. I'll be in your father's area this afternoon. Would you like me to stop by?" "Yes," I said, too quickly. Then softer, "Yes, please." He arrived around 3. Rain had followed him from the city, and he stood in the doorway shaking droplets from his coat like an old hound. Even at 70, he had that kind of presence that made you straighten your back without meaning to. He smelled faintly of old books and peppermint. "Same house," he murmured as he stepped inside. "Feels like your father could walk in any minute." I smiled weakly. I keep expecting that too. He sat down at the dining table, placing a thick folder in front of him. My stomach twisted when I saw the gold lettering, "The Estate of Jonathan Lee." "Now," he began, adjusting his glasses, "your sister has already received a preliminary summary, but I haven't released any official documentation yet. Frankly, I wanted to speak to you first." My heart started to race. "Why?" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Your father made several revisions to his will in the last year. Some changes surprised me, even. He didn't consult your sister much near the end, but he met with me privately 3 times. I leaned forward. "What kind of changes?" He opened the folder slowly, methodically. "Claire is the named executor, which is typical, being the eldest, but the majority of the estate, the house, the trust, the investments, are designated to you, Emma, under one condition." My mouth went dry. "What condition?" "That you do not sell the family home for at least 5 years after his passing. He wanted it preserved." I stared at him. The air seemed to thicken. So Claire lied, completely. Mr. Harris sighed. "She may not know all the details, or perhaps she chose to interpret them differently." But the look in his eyes told me he knew better. She knew. I sat back, the chair creaking under my weight. It wasn't joy I felt, not relief, not victory, just this cold, stunned clarity. All those tears she'd shed at the funeral, all those soft pats on my hand, saying, "You'll be okay, Emma, I'll take care of everything." It was all performance. And she had nearly convinced me that I didn't deserve anything. Mr. Harris slid a document toward me. "I'll be doing the official reading next week. You're welcome to attend. Claire will of course be informed as well." "Will she find out before then?" I asked. He hesitated again, that careful, lawyerly pause. "She may suspect something when I contact her. I'll advise her not to make any financial moves until the estate is finalized." I nodded, but I could already picture her, pacing, furious, unraveling in her big glass kitchen. Claire hated not being in control, and nothing scared her more than being exposed. After Mr. Harris left, the silence in the house felt heavier, but cleaner somehow. I sat at the table long after he'd gone, the legal papers in front of me, Dad's handwriting still echoing in my mind. Trust your instincts. They've always been kinder than most people's intentions. For the first time, I realized what he'd meant. My instincts had whispered all along that Claire wasn't telling the truth. But I'd been too afraid of being the difficult sister, too used to peacekeeping. Now, peace felt overrated. Truth was worth the chaos. That evening, Claire showed up unannounced. Her BMW headlights flashed across the front window, and I felt my pulse jump. I opened the door before she could knock. "Wow," she said, forcing a smile, umbrella in hand. "Didn't expect you to be here." "Dad's house," I said quietly. "Where else would I be?" She hesitated, eyes darting past me, scanning for signs. Then she spotted the folder on the table. Her expression flickered, just for a second. "You missed with him," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, Mr. Harris came by." She dropped her purse on the counter, trying to sound casual. "Oh, anything interesting?" I held her gaze. "I know the truth, Claire." Silence. Then, for the first time in her life, my sister didn't have a ready response. Her face hardened, mask cracking just slightly. "You think you know," she said quietly, "but you don't understand everything." "Then explain it to me." She looked down, picking at her perfectly painted nails. "Dad, he was confused at the end. He changed his mind so many times. I was just trying to protect what he wanted." "By lying to me?" Her eyes flashed. "You wouldn't have handled it well." I laughed bitterly. Handled what? Finding out he left me everything? That stopped her cold. For a moment, she looked like she might break, eyes glassy, breathing shallow. Then she turned cold again, that familiar iciness that always ended our childhood fights. "If you want to believe that," she said, snatching her purse, "but don't say I didn't try to warn you when this all turns into a mess." And with that, she was gone. When the door closed behind her, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt sad. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about years of being invisible, years of letting her speak for both of us, in family dinners, in decisions, in everything. Dad saw that, and maybe this, his final act, was his way of restoring the balance. But I knew one thing now. This wasn't over. Claire wasn't the type to give up easily. And the truth? No. The next few days felt like waiting for a storm that wouldn't quite break. Mr. Harris had scheduled the official will reading for Thursday, and in those quiet in-between days, I tried to go about life as if everything were normal, but nothing felt normal anymore. The house didn't hum the way it used to. No faint radio in the kitchen, no footsteps from Dad in the hallway, no laughter that filled the silence like sunlight. Just me, the ticking of the old clock, and a gnawing question that wouldn't let me sleep. What else was Claire hiding? On Tuesday morning, I found my answer, or at least the start of it. I'd gone into Dad's study to sort through some of his papers. There was still so much to do: utilities, accounts, insurance. Grief comes with paperwork, a quiet cruelty that no one prepares you for. Most of it was ordinary: bank statements, bills, tax returns. But then, in one of the drawers, beneath an old stack of gardening magazines, I found an envelope marked private. The handwriting wasn't Dad's, it was Claire's. My stomach tightened as I opened it. Inside were several printed statements from a bank I didn't recognize, not the one Dad had always used. The account name read Jonathan Lee, joint account holder, Claire Lee. And the balance, dated only 3 months before his death, was just over $280,000. For a moment, I couldn't move. Dad had always been meticulous about his finances. Every transaction logged, every bill paid early. He'd once scolded me for losing a $20 receipt from the gas station. So why would he open a new account with Claire and not tell me? Unless he didn't. I flipped through the pages again. There was a faint signature at the bottom, his name scrawled shakily, and hers beside it. But something about it felt off. Too clean, too even, almost traced. I'd seen Dad sign his name thousands of times. His hand always trembled a little, the legacy of an old injury. This one didn't. That's when I realized what I was holding: a forgery. My breath came fast and shallow. It felt impossible, like accusing the sky of being the wrong color. Claire was manipulative, yes, but criminal? Still, the evidence sat right there in my hands, cold and factual and undeniable. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every interaction between them in my mind. The way she'd insisted on helping him with his bills, the way she always answered his phone when I called, how she'd convinced him to let her handle the stressful stuff. I thought she... The next morning, I called Mr. Harris. "Mr. Harris," I said, my voice tight, "I think I found something you should see." When he arrived that afternoon, I handed him the papers without a word. He read them slowly, his brow furrowing deeper with every line. Finally, he looked up. "Where did you get these?" "They were hidden in his desk, under magazines." He exhaled, long and low. "I've never seen this account before. Your father never mentioned it. Could it be legitimate?" "Possibly," he said, "but I doubt it. The signature, it looks copied." He studied it again, then gave a small, grim nod. "I've handled his documents for 30 years. That's not his hand." My heart sank. So what does that mean? It means someone accessed his money using false authorization. Someone like Claire? He didn't respond, but he didn't have to. That evening, he called the bank listed on the statement. I sat across from him, every muscle tense, listening to half of the conversation. "Yes," he said, "Jonathan Lee, account ending in 9134. I'm his executor." A pause. "I see. And the secondary account holder withdrew how much?" Another pause. Then his face changed, tightened. He hung up and turned to me. "There were multiple withdrawals in the final month," he said quietly. "Nearly the entire balance was transferred into a separate private account under Claire's name alone." The room tilted slightly, and I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. "So she took it while he was dying?" He nodded slowly. "I'm afraid so." I sat back, my chest tight with disbelief. Every part of me wanted to scream, to call her, to demand how she could do something so cruel. But another part of me, the part Dad raised, knew anger wouldn't fix anything. "You'll need proof," I said. "We have enough to start asking questions," he replied. "I'll file a notice with the probate court and freeze any related assets until we sort this out." When he left, I stood alone in the living room, staring at the rain streaking the windows. Dad used to sit right there, reading the newspaper every morning, while Claire and I fought quietly over who got to make his toast. Now she had stolen from him, from us, and all I could think was how disappointed he would be. But in the quiet, beneath the grief and betrayal, something steadier began to take root. Not rage, resolve. Dad had trusted me to protect what he built, and that's exactly what I was going to do. For 2 nights after finding that account, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Dad's signature, shaking slightly in life, too perfect in death. The betrayal had stopped feeling like a wound and started to feel like a mission. Claire had crossed a line that couldn't be smoothed over with apologies or excuses. She had stolen not just money, but trust, the one thing our family had left. And if Dad taught me anything, it was that truth always has a way of coming to the surface, even if someone tries to bury it deep. It was Wednesday morning, one day before the will reading. I went back to Dad's house again, determined to go through everything, every drawer, every file, every shelf. The air smelled faintly of cedar and dust. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, and sunlight pushed weakly through the curtains. I started in the study again, pulling out every folder from the filing cabinet, stacking them by year. Most were just ordinary papers, taxes, property records, receipts. But then, in the bottom drawer, I found a small black notebook. Dad's handwriting filled the first few pages, notes about the garden, a list of books to read. But near the end, something different. Claire came by again today, wants access to the safe. Told her no. She says it's just for convenience. I don't believe that. Emma should know about the code in case anything happens. The next line stopped me cold. I've moved the papers, new safe, behind the painting. Behind the painting? I looked up. Across from his desk hung his favorite piece, a watercolor of a coastal village, framed in worn oak. It had been there since I was a child. My heart started to pound as I stood and lifted it from the wall. Behind it, sure enough, was a small steel safe embedded into the plaster. The keypad blinked softly. I tried the code I knew he always used. Claire's birthday. Nothing. Then I tried mine. A small click sounded, and the door opened. Inside were several folders and a single sealed envelope, addressed in my father's careful handwriting. I sat down slowly, the envelope trembling in my hands. For a moment, I considered calling Claire, doing the decent, proper thing. But then I remembered her voice on the phone. "You're not getting a penny." No, she'd forfeited that right. I tore it open. Inside was a letter dated 6 weeks before he died. It read, "My dearest girls, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. You've both made me proud in your own ways, though you've often misunderstood each other. I've left instructions with Mr. Harris regarding my estate. Everything I've built is meant to take care of both of you, not divide you. Claire, you've been strong and capable, but sometimes too hungry for control. Emma, you've been gentle and patient, sometimes too trusting. Balance each other. I want you to work together to handle what comes next. That is my only true wish." I stared at the words until they blurred. He hadn't wanted this fight, this bitterness, this silence between us. But as I turned over the letter, another sheet slipped out. This one wasn't written by Dad. It was typed, and it looked wrong. At the top, in bold, "Amendment to Will, Jonathan Lee." It claimed to remove me entirely from the inheritance, signed and dated only a week before his death. But the signature, that too perfect signature again, was the same forgery I'd seen on the bank documents. And stapled to the corner was a sticky note in Claire's handwriting. For the lawyer's copy, Dad approved this before he got sick. Except Mr. Harris had never received such an amendment. The pieces clicked together like cruel puzzle parts. She hadn't just taken money, she had tried to rewrite the will. I sat there for a long time, the 2 letters spread before me, one real, one fake. The air in the room felt heavy, the kind of stillness that comes right before everything changes. Part of me wanted to cry. Another part wanted to laugh, the absurdity of it all. But mostly, I just felt sad. Dad's last words were about unity, and yet here I was, alone, holding proof that my sister had betrayed everything he stood for. When I finally told Mr. Harris what I'd found, he drove over within the hour. He read both documents twice, then sat back, sighing. "This explains a lot," he said quietly. "She must have tried to present this amendment to another attorney after your father passed, but since it wasn't filed or witnessed properly, it wouldn't have held up in court." "So she forged it," I said flatly. "Yes, and hid the real letter." He nodded slowly, likely hoping no one would find it. We both sat in silence for a long time. Finally, he said, "Emma, I'm required to disclose this at the reading tomorrow. Once I do, it becomes public record. Your sister will know you found it." I nodded. I want her to know. That night, I didn't sleep. I made tea, then poured it down the sink. Made another. sat at the kitchen table with the letter laid out in front of me like a map of our family's collapse. For the first time, I didn't feel like the fragile one. I wasn't the quiet sister anymore. I was the one carrying the truth. And tomorrow, the whole world would see who Claire really was. Thursday arrived with gray skies, as if the weather itself understood the tension building inside me. I dressed carefully, quietly, choosing a navy dress Dad had once complimented. It wasn't flashy. I didn't want to announce victory. I just wanted to feel like myself. Claire, of course, looked perfect. Red lipstick, high heels, designer coat, the kind of appearance meant to impress and intimidate all at once. I wondered if she knew the storm was coming. I hoped she did. Mr. Harris had arranged the reading in the small office where Dad had worked most of his life. Only immediate family, a few witnesses, and the assistant were present. The room smelled faintly of paper and polish. The light filtering through the blinds hit the desk just right, casting lines across the hardwood floor like prison bars. I sat down across from Claire, who didn't look at me once. Her hands folded on her lap, a faint trembler betraying her calm exterior. Mr. Harris opened the proceedings. "My purpose here," he began, voice calm and firm, "is to read the final and legal will of Jonathan Lee." He paused, flipping through the documents. Claire leaned slightly forward. I sat back, hands in my lap, heart hammering. "When reviewing the estate," he continued, "there were some amendments proposed near the end of Mr. Lee's life. One of these amendments was presented without proper filing, and the signature has been verified as not authentic." Claire's eyes flicked up, just the briefest flash of panic. "This amendment," Mr. Harris said slowly, "attempted to remove Emma Lee from her rightful inheritance." The air felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Claire's hand went to her mouth. She whispered something I couldn't hear. Then she straightened, forcing her usual composure back. Mr. Harris continued, "The final will, legally binding, leaves the majority of the estate to Emma Lee, including the family home, investments, and trust accounts. Claire Lee remains the executor, as designated by Mr. Lee." I felt my chest tighten, a strange mix of relief, vindication, and sorrow. It wasn't joy. It was the quiet satisfaction of truth prevailing. Then he slid another folder across the desk. "This includes evidence of unauthorized transfers and the forged amendment. These documents will be part of the probate record." Claire's face drained of color. Her red lipstick looked sharper against the pale tension spreading across her cheeks. She opened her mouth, and I almost expected her to storm out. But she didn't. Instead, she leaned forward, voice tight and brittle. "You can't prove—" Mr. Harris raised a hand, calm but firm. "Actually, we can. The handwriting analysis confirms the forgery. The bank statements corroborate the transactions. This matter will be reviewed by the probate court." For a long moment, the only sound was the clock ticking. Claire's mask was gone now. Beneath it, fear, shame, and something else, the bitter taste of being caught in the act. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. After the reading concluded, I walked outside into the damp air. The rain had returned, but now it felt cleansing. Claire didn't follow. She stayed behind with Mr. Harris, arguing quietly, but there was no fight left in her. I walked past the gardens, past the apple tree Dad had planted years ago. I placed my hand on the bark, closing my eyes and feeling the rough texture beneath my palm. This house, this life, was ours to protect. Dad had trusted me to see the truth, and I had. When I returned inside, Mr. Harris gave me a quiet nod. "You handled this well," he said. Your father would have been proud. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Yes, I whispered. He always taught me to trust my instincts. That night, Claire sent a message. I hope you understand. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I didn't respond. Truth didn't need words. It had been revealed. Justice, quiet, measured, and inevitable, had prevailed. And for the first time in weeks, I felt peace. The next morning, I woke to a quiet house, the kind of quiet that feels deliberate, like the world is holding its breath, waiting for the next move. I didn't have to wait long. Claire showed up at the front door, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood, umbrella dripping onto the welcome mat. I opened the door without a word. She stepped inside as if she owned the place, but this time I felt a strange shift in the air, a tension that hadn't been there before. "Emma," she said, voice soft, almost coaxing. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer immediately. I simply motioned for her to sit in the living room. The sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating every crease of her carefully applied makeup. She looked smaller somehow, less invincible. I didn't mean for things to go this far," she began. I could hear the words, carefully chosen, rehearsed, but there was no apology, not really. I took a deep breath. "I know what you did, Claire," I said quietly. "I found the forged amendment, the hidden bank account, the letters. You tried to take everything Dad left me. And for what? Control? Money? Pride?" She flinched, her eyes darted away. Then back at me, sharper this time, defensive. "You don't understand," she whispered. He wasn't thinking straight. I was helping him. You're too soft to make decisions like that. I just wanted to protect him." I laughed softly, a sound brittle and cold. Protect him? By stealing from him? By lying? By trying to erase me from his life? Her face paled. "You wouldn't understand," she shouted, voice breaking. For the first time, I saw it clearly. The sibling I had grown up with, the one who had always overshadowed me, was terrified. Not of me, of exposure, of losing the control she had believed was hers. "You're going to have to face the consequences," I said, calm but firm. "No more games, Claire. No more lies. Dad trusted me to see the truth, and I will protect what's ours." Her lips quivered. I didn't think you'd find out this soon," she whispered. "You should have thought about that before you tried to forge a signature," I said. "Before you hid the money. Before you told me I'd get nothing." She sank back into the couch, silent. The storm inside her was... I stood up, walking slowly to the window. The sunlight fell on my hands, on the old wooden floorboards, on the apple tree outside. "This isn't just about money, Claire," I said softly. "It's about trust. It's about respect. It's about Dad, who loved both of us, and you tried to erase me." Her eyes filled with tears. She didn't argue. She didn't cry out. She just sat there, finally seeing, at least for a moment, the consequences of her choices. After a long silence, I continued. "I'm willing to let this go in the sense that I don't want to ruin you, but I will not let you control me or this house or Dad's legacy. You will cooperate with the estate. You will act honestly, and you will never, ever try to manipulate me again." She nodded, small, fragile. I understand," she whispered. I didn't believe her, not yet, but I had made my boundary clear. That evening, I called Mr. Harris. "Everything's in place," I told him. "Claire knows the truth. She's compliant for now." He chuckled softly. You've got a way of handling things, Emma. Your father would have been proud. I smiled faintly. Not proud in the sense of applause, I said. Proud in the sense that I finally listened to him. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a steady heartbeat inside my chest. Not fear, not grief, but clarity. That night, I went to bed early. For the first time in months, I slept without checking the clock, without dreading the next call, without imagining Claire's lies. Because I had taken control. I had acted on the truth. And while the journey ahead, legal, emotional, familial, would be difficult, I finally felt grounded. The morning after the confrontation, I woke with a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt since Dad passed. No more waiting, no more second guessing. The estate needed protection, and I would see it done. I started by sitting down with Mr. Harris again. We laid out a plan, step by step, every transaction, every document, every move Claire might attempt. Emma, he said, looking over his glasses, legally, you're on solid ground, but be aware, some people will try to exploit the smallest gap. We need to make sure everything is airtight. I nodded. This isn't just about money, I said. It's about Dad, about what he built. I can't let her twist it or take it from me, or him, again. He smiled faintly. You're doing exactly what your father would have done, and, to be honest, more efficiently than most people your age. We started with the family home. The deed, the mortgage, the insurance, everything was carefully reviewed. I had a key role in signing off, ensuring no unauthorized changes could be made. Next, the trust accounts. Mr. Harris contacted the banks directly, freezing accounts that Claire might try to access. Any large transfers required dual authorization, mine and the bank's. I sat there while the assistant typed furiously, the sound of keys clicking in the quiet room like drum beats, marking the rhythm of reclaiming control. We also examined Dad's investments. Claire had tried to contact brokers, possibly attempting to liquidate assets or shift ownership. Mr. Harris called each one personally, putting alerts and holds on all accounts. Every time my phone buzzed with a notification, my heart jumped, not out of fear, but anticipation. Every successful freeze, every secured asset felt like reclaiming a small piece of Dad. By mid-afternoon, the house was quiet again. I sat on the couch with a cup of tea, watching sunlight move across the walls. Claire hadn't called or texted. I knew she was probably simmering somewhere, realizing, finally, that she couldn't outmaneuver the law, that her manipulations would fail. And yet, despite her deceit, I felt no triumph in that thought. Only relief. Relief that the estate and Dad's memory was protected. That evening, I walked through the house slowly. Every room held a memory. Dad teaching me to tie my shoes in the hallway, the smell of his pipe in the study, Sunday dinners in the kitchen with laughter and occasional arguments. I paused at his favorite chair, the one by the window where he read his newspaper. I placed my hand on the armrest, feeling the indent of his life still lingering there. This was more than money, more than control. This was his legacy, and I wasn't going to let anyone steal it. I called Mr. Harris once more that night. "Everything is secure, right?" I asked, voice quiet. "Yes," he said. "Claire has no access. Legally, she can contest the will, but with the evidence we have, the forged amendment, the hidden accounts, the court will side with the original, authentic documents." I exhaled slowly, letting tension leave my shoulders. I don't want her to hurt Dad's memory anymore. "She won't," he said. "You're too careful for that, and you care too much about getting it right." I smiled faintly. "Yes, I do." By the end of the week, everything was in place. The house secure, the investments protected, Claire's attempts to manipulate blocked, and the will officially entered into the probate record. It wasn't a victory of cruelty. It was a victory of truth, of love, of honoring a man who had trusted me with his final wishes. That night, as I locked the front door, I looked out at the garden. The apple tree stood sturdy against the wind, its branches bending but not breaking. I felt a kinship with it. Like me, it had weathered storms, and like me, it would continue to grow. I finally understood what Dad meant when he told me to trust my instincts. They weren't just tools for surviving the world. They were The morning of the probate hearing, I woke early, heart hammering, not from fear, but from anticipation. Everything was set. The will was secure. The forged amendment documented. Claire had no legal leverage left. Still, nothing could have prepared me for the intensity of walking into a courtroom for the first time in my life. The room smelled of polished wood and leather, the soft echo of footsteps on tile mixing with murmurs from the small audience. Claire sat across the aisle from me, perfectly poised, but her composure was brittle. I could see it in the tightness of her jaw, the faint tremor in her hands. I took a deep breath and let the calm I had cultivated over the past weeks anchor me. Mr. Harris spoke first, presenting the documentation, the forged amendment, the hidden bank accounts, the letters from Dad, all meticulously detailed. "Your Honor," he said, "this is not just a matter of inheritance. This is a matter of fraud, deception, and attempted misappropriation of assets." I could feel Claire stiffen across the room. Her eyes flicked toward me, a storm barely contained. When the evidence of the hidden account was revealed, I saw her facade begin to crack. She withdrew nearly $300,000 from a private account without authorization, Mr. Harris continued. The signature on a so-called amendment to the will is conclusively forged. Any claims she may attempt are null under probate law. Claire's lips pressed together. Her eyes darted around the courtroom, searching for some lifeline, but there was none. When it was my turn to speak, I rose slowly, keeping my voice steady. The courtroom seemed to fall silent. "Your Honor," I began, "I'm not here to punish my sister. I'm here to honor my father's wishes. He trusted me with the truth, and I intend to uphold that trust for his memory, for this family, and for myself." Claire's head lowered, but over the next hour, Mr. Harris laid out every detail. The timeline of events, the discrepancies in the amendment, the transfers of money. He presented the letters, the hidden safe, and the forged signature. It was a meticulous, careful unraveling of Claire's deceit. And with each piece of evidence, I felt the weight of betrayal lift a little. Dad's voice seemed to echo in my head, soft and approving. "Trust your instincts, Emma. They've never failed you." When the judge finally spoke, the room held its breath. After reviewing the evidence, it is clear that the last valid will leaves the estate primarily to Emma Lee as her father intended. The forged amendment has no legal standing. The estate shall be administered accordingly, with Claire Lee serving as executor, but under full legal oversight. Claire's face went pale. She didn't argue. She didn't protest. The consequences were real now, undeniable, public, final. Walking out of the courtroom, the air felt lighter, almost electric. Sunlight caught the edges of the courthouse steps, and I realized how heavy the past weeks had been, but how far I'd come. Claire stayed behind, arguing quietly with the lawyers. I didn't watch her. I didn't need to. The truth had prevailed. Justice, quiet. The days after the probate hearing were surreal. Claire was still part of the family by law, the executor, but in every other sense, The balance of power had shifted irrevocably. She tried to act normal at first, arriving at Dad's house with her usual poise, sipping tea in the living room, but her eyes avoided mine. The smile she wore was tight, forced, brittle. I could feel the tension, like a rope stretched too far. Any sudden movement and it would snap. Within a week, the consequences of her actions began to unfold. The bank, alerted to the forged withdrawals, launched a full review. Claire had to answer questions under oath. Every unauthorized transfer was scrutinized, and she was forced to repay a portion of the money she had thought she could claim without consequence. Her friends began to distance themselves. Word spread quietly through social circles and family connections. Claire had attempted fraud. Her reputation, carefully cultivated for years, began to crack. Even within our family, the fallout was palpable. Relatives who had once whispered about my supposed softness now looked at me with respect. They saw that I had handled the estate with integrity, protecting Dad's legacy and his memory. Claire, on the other hand, found herself isolated. Her usual influence, her commanding presence, none of it worked anymore. I didn't gloat. Instead, I focused on restoring the home Dad had loved. I went through the garden, pruning the roses he had planted, repairing the kitchen bench he had always complained about, sorting his books on the shelves in the study. Each small act felt like reclaiming a piece of him. I imagined him smiling quietly from the next room, seeing me care for what mattered most. One evening, Claire finally came to speak to me. Not in anger, not in defiance, but quietly, almost apologetically. "Emma," she said, voice soft and uneven, I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought I was protecting Dad. I never wanted him to be hurt." I looked at her, seeing the shadow of the sister I had grown up with, the girl who had once been my ally. "I know," I said gently, "but protecting him doesn't mean hurting others. It doesn't mean lying. It doesn't mean taking what's not yours." Her eyes filled with tears. She nodded, unable to speak. For the first time, I saw humility where arrogance had lived for so long. The legal consequences were not over, but I had done what I needed to do. Claire would face restitution, she would be monitored as executor, and she had been publicly exposed. Her attempts at control were gone, her manipulations laid bare. Karma, slow and certain, had arrived. That night, I sat in Dad's study, the rain tapping gently against the windows, and I felt a profound sense of peace. Justice had been served. Truth had prevailed. The weeks following the court ruling were quiet, but not empty. Life felt different now, like the air had been cleared after a storm. Claire no longer carried herself with that false confidence. Her visits were measured, polite, but the energy between us had shifted irreversibly. She no longer assumed power. She now measured every word, every gesture. Family gatherings became awkward at first. Relatives who had once avoided tension now watched us carefully, waiting for signs of discord. But I made a conscious choice. I wouldn't let anger or resentment dictate the space Dad had left us. Instead, I focused on building bridges, slowly, cautiously, but deliberately. One afternoon, Claire approached me in the kitchen. She was folding laundry, hands trembling slightly. "Emma," she began, I want to try to make this right. I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to start being honest, helping with the estate, and maybe even rebuild our relationship." I paused, folding a shirt, feeling the weight of weeks of tension. "I can't promise we'll be best friends," I said finally, "but I'm willing to accept your honesty from now on. Dad wanted us to work together. Even after everything, I'll try to honor that." Her eyes glistened with tears. "I'll do my best," she whispered, "for Dad, for us." Over the following weeks, our interactions were tentative. Claire followed instructions, consulted me on estate matters, and slowly began to show that her ambition could be tempered by accountability. I noticed small changes. She would ask my opinion before making decisions, she would double-check documents rather than assuming control, and occasionally she would share memories of Dad with genuine warmth instead of using them as leverage. Our family began to adjust too. Cousins, aunts, and uncles noticed the shift. Where tension had once ruled, a cautious respect began to grow. We started holding Sunday dinners again, though they were quieter than before, and each of us seemed to understand the delicate balance that had been restored. I also focused on myself, on reclaiming a sense of normalcy. I spent time in the garden, reading books Dad had recommended, and even took a short trip with friends I had neglected over the months. It was a subtle healing, a reminder that life moves forward even after betrayal and loss. One evening, Claire came to the study with a small photo album. She handed it to me quietly. I thought, maybe we could go through this together. Some memories are worth keeping, even if we fight. I looked at her surprised. Inside were pictures of birthdays, vacations, and family holidays, snapshots of happier times before greed and deception had entered our lives. We went through the album slowly, commenting on old hairstyles, fashions, and forgotten. It was a quiet morning when I finally allowed myself to breathe. The rain had stopped overnight, and sunlight poured softly through the windows, painting warm patterns across the wooden floors. I sat in Dad's study, a cup of tea warming my hands, and let the silence settle around me. Months of betrayal, tension, and grief had worn me down, but now, after securing the estate and facing Claire, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't known in years. I thought about Dad, his laughter, his quiet counsel, the way he always believed in fairness and truth. He would have wanted this, not revenge, not punishment, but restoration, honesty, and care. Claire had begun to show her willingness to change. She was still flawed, stubborn, occasionally defensive, but the walls she had built around herself were slowly crumbling. One afternoon, we sat together in the kitchen, sorting through Dad's old letters. She reached for a stack, hesitated, then looked at me. "Emma, I'm sorry, not just for the money, but for everything. I wasn't always a good sister." I nodded, voice steady but soft. "I know, and I forgive you, not to erase what happened, but so we can move forward, together, as Dad would have wanted." Her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, there was no tension, no pretense. Over the next few weeks, I focused on rebuilding my own sense of peace. I spent afternoons in the garden, pruning roses and planting new flowers, listening to the wind in the trees, feeling life continue in its quiet, patient way. I reconnected with friends I had neglected, rebuilding the parts of my life that had been overshadowed by grief and conflict. Even the smallest moments felt like healing: the smell of fresh bread baking, the way sunlight streamed across the living room, the sound of laughter in the kitchen. Claire and I began to establish a new rhythm. We no longer competed or plotted. Instead, we consulted each other, shared memories of Dad, and worked together on the estate as partners rather than adversaries. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of friction, moments where old habits tried to resurface, but each time we paused, reminded ourselves of the lessons learned, and chose honesty and patience. One evening, I found myself in Dad's study, reading a letter he had written years ago. "Emma, life is not about avoiding pain, but about facing it with courage and kindness. Protect what matters, forgive when possible, and never lose yourself in anger." I held the letter close, feeling a warmth I hadn't realized I missed. He had trusted me with his wisdom, and I had learned to honor it fully. Forgiveness wasn't a single moment. It was a process, a choice repeated daily. And as I moved through it, I felt lighter, freer, able to love my sister again without fear or resentment. We shared dinner one night, laughing over a story from our childhood, and I realized something profound. Family could heal, even after betrayal. And in that healing, I found myself. The garden bloomed around me, the house felt alive with light and warmth, and I knew, finally, that the sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the garden, the same garden Dad had tended for decades. I sat on the porch, watching the apple tree sway gently in the evening breeze, and I allowed myself to reflect on everything that had happened. Months ago, life had been consumed by betrayal and grief. Claire's lies, the hidden accounts, the forged amendment, all of it had threatened not just my inheritance, but my sense of trust, my sense of family, my sense of self. But through the pain, I had learned something profound. Truth is stronger than deception. Integrity is more powerful than greed. And forgiveness is not weakness, it is freedom. I thought about Claire, the sister I had once envied, feared, and resented. Through consequences and accountability, through confrontation and patience, she had begun to change. We would never be perfect, and our past could not be erased, but we had found a new path forward, one built on honesty, boundaries, and mutual respect. I thought about Dad. His voice echoed in my mind, calm and steady. Trust your instincts, protect what matters, love fiercely but fairly. I had followed his guidance, even when it was difficult, even when the betrayal cut deep. And in doing so, I had preserved not just his estate, but his legacy, his memory, and the values he had instilled in me. The house felt alive again. The garden bloomed. The sunlight touched every corner of the rooms he had loved. I realized that life was not about avoiding pain, but about facing it with courage. It was about standing for truth, protecting what mattered, and having the strength to forgive, not for others, but for yourself. Claire and I had found a tentative peace. The estate was secure. Dad's wishes were honored. And most importantly, I had reclaimed my sense of self, my sense of family, and my ability to love without fear. As I watched the last rays of the sun fade into the horizon, I whispered softly to the wind, "Thank you, Dad. I did my best. I kept your legacy alive, and I will continue to honor it with integrity, with love, and with courage." The world was quiet. The house was full of memories, and I knew, finally, that peace was not just possible, it was here, growing quietly, steady as the garden, and I would carry it forward for myself, for Claire, and for Dad.